In a world where the weight of pride often crushed the weight of love, one father made a choice that scarred not only his family, but his very soul. The story begins with Forwame, a man whose heart was carved from stone, a man who mistook honor for fear, and fear for strength. To him, shame was a poison that spread quickly, and his daughter's hidden pregnancy was the kind of shame he believed had to be erased, no matter the cost. Naya, his quiet, gentle daughter, had carried her burden in silence. She gave birth to twin boys all alone on the cold kitchen floor, the air heavy with pain, the room dim and unwelcoming. There was no blessing, no helping hand, no word of comfort, only her sweat, her tears, and the tiny cries of two newborns filling the empty house. And yet the moment she held them, she whispered inside her heart that she would love them fiercely, even if the whole world turned away. But Forwame had already decided. His pride left no room for mercy. Without speaking, without explaining, he lifted his weakened daughter and her two fragile babies, wrapped in thin cloths, and placed them in the back of his old pickup truck. The engine rattled as he drove, the night swallowing them mile by mile. The road twisted into the wilderness, a place where shadows lived and silence ruled. He stopped in the deepest part, far from the eyes of men. With rough, practiced hands, he tied Nia to a tree, her babies pressed against her chest, and left her there to die with them. He turned away, never looking back, as though abandoning weeds, not blood. He drove home believing the problem was solved, believing he had buried disgrace in the forest. But fate has its own eyes, and cruelty never goes unseen. That very night, a young man named Eli was wandering the woods, gathering firewood before darkness thickened. His hands gripped an axe, his shoulders bent under a small bundle of branches, but his ears caught something strange, a sound not belonging to birds, not to beasts, not to the forest. It was a cry, sharp, fragile, human. That cry stopped him, in his tracks. That cry would lead him to a sight that not only saved 3 lives, but also pulled the mask off a cruelty the whole village had silently allowed for far too long. To understand how Forwame could commit such an act, we must look deeper into the man himself. He was never one to smile, not with his wife, not with his children, not even with his neighbors. His face was a map of hard lines, each wrinkle etched by bitterness rather than laughter. From boyhood he had carried a pride so fierce it bent to no one, not to reason, not even to love. He was the son of a stern farmer, the grandson of a man who preached punishment before compassion, rules before kindness. In the village he was called respected, but if one dared to meet his eyes, they would see it clearly. His respect was built on fear, not love. When Nia, the daughter who had never raised her voice, turned up pregnant, something inside Forwame split open. Or perhaps it only revealed the truth he had hidden all along, the thought that his unmarried daughter could bear not 1 but 2 children without a husband, without approval, without blessing. It was too much for his dry, cracked heart to endure. To him it wasn't only dishonor. It was an insult, a curse, a scandal planted right at his own doorstep. And Forwame was a man who did not know how to handle scandal. The weeks after her secret came to light turned their home into a graveyard. No one spoke. Benny, his wife, moved as if stepping across a minefield, fearful of triggering his anger. Their youngest son ate in silence, eyes glued to his plate, pretending to be sick so he could stay in bed. And Nia herself, she became a shadow. She sat on the porch with her hands resting on her round belly, her eyes searching the road, as if waiting for her father to become human again. But Forwame was a statue, a wall no hope could climb. "My daughter does not bring disgrace into this house." He repeated the line often, calm but sharp. Each word struck like a stone. To him, Nia was a disease to be cut out, her children serpents. before they even breathed air. He called them sins, devil's children, fruits of shame. Not once did he ask who the father was. Not once did he try to understand. He cared nothing for her tears, nothing for her pain. All that mattered was the family name, the honor before the village, the whispers of the farmers in the market. When Nia's contractions began, Forwame made sure to be absent. He walked to the fields, pretending to have work, refusing to acknowledge his daughter's pain. He forbade calling the midwife. He banned candles. He forbade prayers. When a neighbor knocked, offering help with a chicken and a clean cloth, he slammed the door shut. "We do not celebrate sin here," he said, sweeping the yard as if he could sweep away the shame of his own blood. But Forwame himself was no stranger to hidden wounds. As a boy, he had watched his own mother thrown out of the house for a mistake never spoken of. His father filled his ears with hate for weakness, for shame, for compassion. He was taught that tears were weakness, that forgiveness was weakness, that women had value only in silence and obedience. So he built his life like a fortress. Stone walls, no doors, no windows. But when Nia's belly grew, it was a mirror he refused to look into, for in it he saw everything he had buried: tenderness, failure, an unresolved past. And instead of facing it, he burned the mirror by plotting punishment. He gathered vines, in secret, stopped buying milk, stopped bringing fruit for the house. "We do not feed disgrace," he told Abeni. He went to bed early but stayed awake late, mind working, planning, calculating. And when the twins were born at last, tiny, weak, crying with sharp little voices, he didn't look at them. Not once. He stepped over their cloths, ignored the sour smell of milk, ignored his daughter's sobs, and said coldly, "It's too late now. They are in the world, but they won't stay in it for long." In Forwame's mind, it was not murder. It was correction. It was undoing what should never have been. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was that the world he thought he controlled was already shifting. The old kind of honor no longer echoed in every corner. Even the quietest heart still knew what was right. Because, when cruelty hides behind the mask of tradition, even the forest itself cries out for justice. Meanwhile, Naya's body grew weaker. Her swollen feet throbbed, her bones ached, her nights were haunted by fear. Fear of birth, fear of death, fear of the judgment of the world. Her mother could not even look at her belly, too afraid of being punished for compassion. The house was soaked in silence, every corner dripping with judgment. And yet deep inside Naya, a stubborn hope flickered, the kind only a mother can carry. Maybe her father would soften when he saw the babies. Maybe his heart would awaken. But each cold gesture, each cruel word killed that hope, piece by piece. The night she went into labor, the air was heavy and humid. She was washing a glass, trying to appear useful, when the first contraction ripped through her like a blade. She gripped the stove, bit her lip, and called for no one. Not because she was strong, but because she knew weakness had no place in that house. She crawled to the corner of the kitchen, sat on a folded cloth, and braced herself. Her mother, pretending to sleep, dared not move. Hours dragged. Pain crashed over her in waves. She bit her hand to keep from screaming. She thought she might faint, but she didn't. With her own trembling hands, she delivered her first baby, a boy, into the silence of the kitchen. Before she could even hold him properly, another wave of pain came, sharper, fiercer, and soon another cry. Another boy. 2 babies. 2 cries. 2 fragile lives born between a stove and abandonment. She held them to her chest, their tiny hearts pressing against her own. Milk rose in her body, as if her very being was fighting to make up for everything the world had stolen from her. She whispered silently, "The world rejects you, but I don't." Hours later, Forwame entered the kitchen. His eyes swept over the blood, the smell of sour milk, the cloths soaked in sweat. He looked once, then turned his back without a word. He walked out as if nothing had happened, as if his daughter had not just given birth to her own story in silence. Nia did not cry. Her tears had long dried inside her. She simply wiped her babies clean with a damp cloth, wrapped them in old fabric, and held them close. And in that house where silence had once been heavy, there was now a new sound. The sound of two tiny hearts beating alongside hers. Two children nobody wanted but who breathed. And that was enough. The next morning, she tried to walk to the bedroom. Her legs trembled. Milk stained her shirt. Her eyes burned. Her mother left a bowl of porridge at the edge of the table. Without saying a word, her little brother walked in, looked at the nephews from a distance and simply said, "They look like you," then ran off into the yard as if he'd committed a crime. Nia spent the following days between cloths and quiet promises. She nursed through pain but without giving up. Every feeding was an act of resistance. Every cry a declaration that they were alive. She looked out the window and thought, "Does God see us here? Because if he did, why was the suffering so long?" The answer never came. But still, Nia endured. Like the trees in the forest, the ones no one waters, yet bloom after the rain, she didn't know she was being watched. That deep in the woods, a just heart was already hearing it all, even if it didn't understand yet. That salvation would come by an unexpected path. But in that moment, between pain and silence, between milk and tears, Nia knew only one thing. The danger wasn't just the birth. It was what came after. Because her father hadn't forgotten his promise. And when he said he was going to fix everything, it wasn't comfort. It was a sentence. The day broke with a strange silence. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath. The rooster crowed later than usual. The wind took its time brushing through the leaves in the yard. And inside Quash House, the atmosphere was heavy, like a sky about to collapse. A Benny woke early as always, made porridge, lit the charcoal stove, but avoided looking toward her daughter's room. She could feel something was different. It wasn't just the silence. It was the way Ame looked at her. He was sitting at the table, staring at the wall, hands folded over his knee. His face was stiff, his hat resting beside him, and his shoes too clean for someone used to stepping in mud before sunrise. When a Benny placed the plate on the table, he didn't say thank you. He only said, like someone announcing a final cut, "Today I'm going to fix this disgrace." Nia in the other room heard it. She was sitting on a mat holding the twins, trying to nurse both at the same time. The milk was scarce. Her body ached, but she kept going. When she heard her father's voice, she stopped for a moment. She no longer trembled like before. There was no surprise anymore, just a deep sense that the moment had arrived. The one she had feared since the first wave of nausea. Now it was right at the door. Wami Kwame called her name the way one calls a pack mule. He didn't ask. He didn't question. He simply said, "Bring them. We're going out." Nia wrapped the babies in thin cloths, tied them to her body with a worn-out fabric, and walked to the gate without saying a word. A Benny tried to approach, but a sharp gesture from her husband stopped her. He was still in charge of the house. At least for that moment he still believed he controlled fate. The truck was parked in front of the wooden gate. The old pickup Wami, used to haul cassava sacks to the market, would now carry something far heavier, his own soul. In the form of a decision, Nia climbed into the back with the babies, not looking at her mother, not saying goodbye, not because she didn't love her, but because goodbyes are only for those who hope to return. The engine grumbled, the wheels turned slowly, kicking up red dust, and the gate closed. Inside the house, the youngest boy looked at his mother and said in a voice so soft it hurt more than a scream, "He's not bringing anyone back." Her Benny dropped to her knees, not out of hysteria but exhaustion. She grabbed a stub of candle, lit it on the kitchen floor, and stayed there. eyes fixed on the flame like someone begging the sky to step in where the earth had already failed. On the road, the dust mingled with Nia's heavy thoughts. The baby slept or whimpered softly. She held them tight to her chest like someone trying to protect them. From their own blood drove in silence. He didn't look in their view mirror. The dirt road stretched before them like a path with no return, each turn more remote than the last dot. After an hour, he veered off onto a trail no one else used. The forest began to close in. Tall grass brushed the car's windows and branches, scraped the paint-like fingers, trying to stop the inevitable. When the truck finally stopped, the engine cut off like a final drum beat. Got out, walked to the back, and opened the door, told Nia to get down. She obeyed, the baby still tied to her body. He pulled out the vine he had brought, coiled on the front seat. A thick, damp vine, one that haddied up oxen, bundles of firewood, heavy sacks, but never a person, never a daughter, never grandchildren. Without a word, he led her to a thick tree, its roots twisted like they were made to hold secrets. He tied Nia's hands to the trunk, then with another knot secured the cloths that held the babies to her body. The twins started to cry, not from hunger. Not yet, but as if they sensed something was wrong, as if life itself had stopped breathing. Nia tried to speak. She didn't beg. She didn't scream. She just said one sentence, suspended in the air like campfire smoke. "Father, they're not to blame." Didn't respond. His face frozen, eyes dry. He turned his back, walked to the truck, started the engine, and drove away. The sound of the truck fading was the sound of abandonment. Every meter it moved was like another shovel full of dirt thrown over hope. The forest returned to its natural silence. But now in that forgotten corner of the world, there were 3 heartbeats fighting against fate. But not every sound is lost in the woods. Sometimes when the human heart hears what the ears ignore, the story changes course. And that same day, a young man was walking not far from there collecting firewood for his grandmother. Unknowingly, he was about to hear the cry Ukame had tried to silence. It was late afternoon when Thaisun began to disappear behind the tall trees, painting the sky in that red, sorrowful hue, as if it too knew something wrong had been done. The dense forest where Wame had tied near was the kind of place even hunters avoided after dark. Twisted branches, roots exposed like snakes, and a silence broken only by the sound of insects and solitude itself. Nia leaned against the thick trunk of a damp tree, one that smelled of abandonment. Her arms bound with vine, her children pressed tightly to her chest, each wrapped in a cloth already soaked with sweat, stained with milk and dust. Her breasts still dripped milk, but her exhaustion was so overwhelming that her eyes kept trying to close. She wasn't sleeping. She was fainting slowly, but every small movement from the babies startled her awake. She knew that if she blacked out completely, they wouldn't survive. The forest sounds were cruel at that hour. Her children's cries seemed to echo through the branches, as if nature itself was listening, but didn't know what to do. Ants began to crawl up her legs, drawn by the sweet scent of leaking milk. Nia couldn't swat them away. She could only move her head, sometimes sharply, sometimes slowly, trying to keep the insects away from the delicate faces she had brought into the world alone, and was now trying to protect with the only thing she had left, her own body. Her throat ached. Her mouth was as dry as a dead leaf. It had been more than 4 hours since Kwame had left her there. The sun was gone, and the cold began to rise from the ground. The kind of cold that doesn't come from the outside, but from within. When fear takes over, when the body starts to give in, when the soul begins to say goodbye, Nia no longer thought of salvation. She thought of survival, of making time pass until morning, of keeping the babies breathing, even if just barely. She started to sing softly, a lullaby her mother used to sing to her when she was little. An old song, one almost no one remembered. Her voice came out weak, broken, But the babies seemed to hear it. The youngest stopped crying. The other one only whimpered, and Nia shut her eyes tightly as if singing was her way of saying, "We're still here, it's not over yet." But each minute there was an eternity. Her belly still bled a little, giving birth alone had left marks. The vine cut into her wrist slowly like a dull knife. The smell of forest, sweat, fear, milk, and crying mixed with the scent of a night arriving without mercy. The forest is alive, the elders say. And that night it felt like everything was watching. The branches, the owls, the wind passing through like laments. The tree Nia wasted to seemed too grown. With every gust of wind, a creak with every movement of the babies, a whisper, Nia no longer had strength to think, only to feel. She felt her body ache, her heartbeat weaken, her skin burn, and still she didn't let go of her children. Even bound, her arms fixed, she leaned forward just enough for the cloth to cover them. Protecting them was all she had left, and she would do it with her last breath. If it came to that, Dot, then she heard a different sound, a rustle that wasn't from the wind. Footsteps, slow, heavy, but careful, like someone walking barefoot trying not to be heard. Nia tried to scream, but her voice wouldn't come. Her throat was raw. Only a hoarse groan escaped. The sound got closer. Now there was breathing. Someone was near. It wasn't her father. Her heart knew it. It was a new sound different from the silence of rejection. And in that instant, between the fear of a stranger and the certainty of abandonment, she chose hope. Because even in the darkest forest, even in the deepest abandonment, there are those who hear what cruelty tried to silence. And it was there, among roots and vines, that fate began to shift. Not with noise, not with heroics, but with the slow approach of someone who carried within them the memory of another pain. Eli had watchful eyes, not by nature, but by survival, orphaned by his mother at the age of 9. He had learned early that those who don't pay attention to life's signs end up crushed by them. He was raised by his grandmother, a quiet woman with steady hands and a small yet unwavering faith. Eli walked the forest trails as if walking through his own home. Every sound was familiar. Every smell told him something. And on that humid afternoon, when he set out with an axe on his shoulder and a burlap sack on his back, all he was thinking about was bringing home dry firewood before the rain came. The trail he chose was rarely used. Most of the village men preferred to cut wood near the river, where the path was open, and the wind blew more gently. But Eli liked the silence of the dense woods. He said that there, among the thick trees and tangled roots, he could hear his thoughts better and hear the sounds no one else noticed. That's why he stopped suddenly, in the middle of the path. With an acacia branch already cut at his feet, he heard a strange sound. It was faint, muffled, almost lost among the buzzing insects. But Eli knew the forest sounds like few others. He could tell the chirping of a nest from the whimper of a wounded animal. And that sound wasn't from any animal. It was human. A small, uneven cry as if coming from someone too weak to scream. He stood still for a moment, his heart beating in the rhythm of uncertainty. It could have been a lost traveler, or someone from the village in trouble. But deep down, something told him it was more serious. That this wasn't just a cry of pain. It was a cry of abandonment, and that he knew all too well. Dot, following the sound, he pushed through low branches, jumped over. A fallen trunk sank his feet into a patch of wet clay, and then he saw it. Beneath a thick tree, hidden among leaves and vines, was the cruelest sight. His eyes had ever witnessed the young woman tied up. Pale skin, hair stuck to her forehead, cracked lips bound with vines so tight they looked ready to slice through her skin and pressed against her chest. To newborns, all three covered in ants, in sweat, in dry leaves. The babies no longer cried loudly, only whimpered, soft, fragile, as if begging the world for a second chance. Eli dropped the sack and the axe. He stepped forward slowly, respectfully, like someone stepping onto sacred ground. Kneeling before the young woman, he spoke in a low but steady voice, "Are you alive?" She opened her eyes with effort, like someone returning from a faraway place. She didn't speak, but a groan escaped her throat, a sound of both relief and pain. He pulled out his machete and carefully cut the vines. Her hands dropped, limp, powerless. Eli took off his own shirt and wrapped. The babies, one on each side, trying to get rid of the ants, trying to bring back warmth. Then, without thinking too much, he held the babies to his chest and supported Nia by the shoulders, lifting her slowly. She could barely stand. The way back was long. He had to stop 3 times to adjust the cloths, wipe the sweat, offer her sips from his water bottle. He kept talking to her, trying to keep her awake. Just a little longer. We're almost there. They need you. They're not going to die here. As they reached the edge of the village, the scene felt like another world. People selling cassava, children playing with rag balls, old women braiding hair in the shade, the everyday peace of those who had no idea what had just come out of the forest. But Eli didn't hesitate. He walked into the village square like someone carrying a cross, a baby in each arm. The young woman barely conscious, leaning on his shoulder. Silence fell like a stone on the village. 1, 2, 3 people stopped talking. Voice hushed. Hands froze mid-air, and right there, in front of everyone, the shame no longer belonged to the daughter. It belonged to those who knew and did nothing. But Eli didn't look at the faces, only at the babies, and at the young woman, who, even on the edge of death, still held the little ones with what little strength she had left. And there, before everyone, an older woman, the midwife, the same one who had been turned away from Kwa's house weeks before, stepped forward, placed her hand on Eli's shoulder, and said, "Whoever abandons their own blood withers from the inside." Eli nodded, said nothing. He didn't need to. The justice that had started deep in the woods was now entering the heart of the village. And that story, born from the silence of shame, had begun to echo with the force of truth. The heart of the village of Mbali had always been the square. That's where truths disguised themselves as idle chatter and lies turned into gossip in under a minute. It was where bread changed hands, flour was measured by the eye, and life happened between one sale and the next. But that late afternoon, the square fell silent, as if every whisper, every word thrown to the wind, had been pulled back into the mouths that once let them loose. Eli walked through the square with slow but steady steps. The sun was already hiding, casting long shadows across the ground. In each arm, a baby thin, weak eyes half up on his shoulder. Nia, pale like someone who had already crossed the threshold between this world and the next, her cloth still stained with dried blood. Her face, marked with ant bites. But her eyes, Nia's eyes were open and alive because someone had heard what no one else dared to listen to. The first to stand were the older women, the ones who braided hair under the shade of the mango tree. One of them raised a hand to her mouth as if horror had the taste of something she never wanted to swallow. Another murmured, "My God, that's Kwa's daughter." But no one moved. Fear still hung in the air. Shame was a ghost floating above them all because deep down everyone knew. Everyone had seen her belly grow. Everyone had watched the girl waste away. Everyone had heard the muffled cries in the middle of the night. But they did nothing. And now right in front of them was the result of their collective silence. A young woman dragging her body. 2 newborns wrapped in rags and a boy, not family. Just human trying to save what was left of 3 lives thrown away like garbage. The midwife stepped forward. Dorna Kafui, an old name, hands still strong, a heart that had welcomed more children into the world than the entire region's clinic. She took the babies gently, checked their eyes, felt their tiny chests, and when she looked up, there were dry tears in her eyes. "They were alive," she said. barely but alive. One of Kwa's neighbors, the kind who always peeked through cracks in the gate, whispered, "But he said he took them to a safe place." And another replied, her voice heavy with guilt. Safe for who? In that moment, the shame changed. Hence, it no longer belonged to the girl who got pregnant alone. It belonged to the village that looked away, the village that stayed quiet, that shrank back, that let tradition become a death sentence, and the baby's eyes too small. Round black eyes like the night before the rain seemed to look at everyone there, not as accusers, but as questions, as if asking, "Where were you?" Eli still held Nia's arm, keeping her upright. Donna Kafui called for help. Women came with blankets. A mat was spread under the tree water, was fetched in a hurry, but no one spoke loudly because everyone knew that this moment was more than a rescue, was a reckoning. Younger of the two boys opened his eyes and looked directly at one of the women who weeks before had said at the market, "She messed around with some low life and now wants sympathy." The woman stepped back as if touched by an invisible hand because what she saw wasn't sin. It was life, and life even born under judgment is still sacred. Little by little, the village began to stir. Mothers came, the youth came. Even those who had defended Kwame at community meetings came. They came to see up close what cruelty dressed as honor had left behind. But there were no more excuses. No more "I didn't know." It was right, there in the middle of the square. The naked truth, weak but intact. Breathing, crying, surviving. And among all those faces only one didn't show up that day. Kwam. Because cowardice once exposed cannot stand the light. The next day the village woke up different. There was no music playing from the market radio. No laughter echoing from doorsteps. The chickens still scratched the same dusty ground. The children still ran down the trails, but an invisible weight covered everything. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and now everyone could finally see, truly see what they had always pretended not to. And at the center of every conversation, even if disguised, hovered one gray cloud of a name, Kwame. But inside his home, he seemed untouched by the storm swirling outside. He woke early, swept the yard as he always did, fed the pigs, washed his hands in a bucket of cold water. Routine for him was a shield, as if repeating the same old motions could erase what he had done. Abeni watched from a distance, seated on the wooden bench, her eyes hollow, her silence screaming. Since the night before, they hadn't exchanged a single word. Then, as he took the last sip of his weak coffee, came the sound of loud knocks on the gate 2, 3, 4 times. Not the kind of knock that asks permission, but the kind that demands to be heard. Stood, walked toward the gate with firm steps, unlatched the iron bolt with its usual metallic snap. But when he opened the gate, he saw something he never expected. There stood Eli, sweaty, caked with mud up to his ankles, shirt torn at the seams, and on his face, no fear. In his eyes, no hesitation. A simple young man with no inherited land, no prestigious family name, no authority, but with the strength only someone who knows pain can carry. She's alive, and so are the children. Eli didn't shout. He didn't point fingers. He just spoke, and his words, spoken with calm, sank like a silent blade into Kwame's pride. The old man didn't answer right away. He just stared at the boy. His eyes, used to intimidating, searched for weakness, but found none. Because Eli hadn't come to argue. He had come to return what Wem had tried to bury. Wem took one step forward. His fist rose, trembling as if ready to deliver a blow he'd carried in his blood for years. But the hand stopped mid-air, and for the first time, it was he who felt the weight of his own gesture. Because Eli didn't flinch, didn't close his eyes. He simply held the stare. And in that second of silence, in that precise moment when the arm froze, understood, he had already lost. Abeni appeared behind the door. She saw the scene, said nothing, but her feet moved. She stepped between the two of them, stopped in front of her husband, and without raising her voice, said the sentence she had held inside for decades. "Today, I'm the one who locks this gate," and she slid the bolt shut. KW stood still, unmoving. The gate closed in his face, not with rage, but with a steady resolve of someone who had finally chosen what is right. Eli turned and walked away without looking back. He wasn't seeking glory. He didn't want recognition. The dignity of that act was enough. Behind the gate, Quayne was left alone. For the first time in many years, the sound of his own breath felt louder than everything else. What once was silence born of authority was now the void of guilt. That afternoon he didn't go to the fields, didn't speak to anyone. He sat on the porch, staring at the same beaten earth he walked every day. But now there was a space he could no longer occupy. The invisible presence of his daughter, his grandchildren, the young man who dared to confront his cowardice, and the gaze of the woman who at last said no. And the village, it kept talking, but now in a different tone, because justice, when it rises from the soil, doesn't shout, it echoes. And that day the village learned that courage doesn't always come with age or a powerful name. Sometimes it comes barefoot, with calloused hands, but with a heart in the right place. In the village of Imbali, there was no courthouse, no robes, no gavel, but there were eyes. And when eyes see too much, they become a sentence. After the morning when Eli knocked on Kwa's gate, and it was the stern old man who stood in, silence the news spread faster than wind before the rain. Women whispered near the well. Men lowered their voices when they spoke Quayne's name. And even the boys in the middle of their game stopped running when passing in front of his house. But no one said anything out loud. Not yet. Because in a place where fear ruled for so long, courage walks in small, careful steps. It was the village pastor who gave the first sign. On Saturday night, during the healing prayer, he called the elders and proposed an emergency meeting. He said he could no longer preach about love and justice from an altar covered in complicit silence. A faith that stays silent in the face of cruelty, he said, isn't faith. It's fear dressed up as religion. The next morning, under the big tree, where the community's matters were usually discussed, all the village leaders gathered, the oldest, the most respected, the ones who never raised their voices without reason. Kwame was summoned. He arrived with his head held high, hands behind his back, as if he still believed time would protect him. He sat in the woven chair with the same expression as always, closed off, hardened, used to being feared. But that was no longer the same. Time. The first to speak was the pastor himself. No shouting, no drama. He simply said, "The village saw, and what the village saw could not be unseen." There was a moment of silence. Then another elder who had worked the fields alongside Wami for decades took a deep breath and added, "Honor is not cleansed by death. It's cleansed by truth." Didn't reply, didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't try to explain. He simply lowered his eyes for the first time. Maybe he already knew there were no arguments left, that the same vine he used to bind his daughter to a tree was now wrapped around his own reputation. Some in the circle still tried to find reasons to defend him. They said he was a man raised in old times, that he didn't know how to show love, that he had been taught through harshness, but the elder's eyes stayed firm. And now the villager's memory had taken shape. 2 babies alive, a daughter who fought not to die, and a young man who brought it all back to the surface with his own hands. There was no shouting, no official condemnation. But there were consequences. Was removed from leadership of the farmers' group, a position he had held for over 20 years. His chair was left empty. His name, once spoken with respect at community meetings, was now only mentioned in whispers, not from fear, but from sorrow, because there is a kind of sorrow that is neither screamed nor wept. It simply carried. Eli, meanwhile, did not attend the meeting. He was at the midwife's shed helping repair the roof. Said he didn't want glory, didn't need gratitude. "I did what any human being should do," he told the midwife, who only replied with a look that said everything. Nia was still recovering, weak but alive, feeding the twins with what milk her body still managed to produce, like a stubborn miracle. She didn't ask for news about her father, didn't want to know if he had been punished. She simply said, "If they grow up without inheriting hate, then it will have been worth it." And the village learned, not through speeches nor punishments, but through eyes, because there are judgments that don't need paper. All it takes is a face, a story, and a silence so heavy that it turns any village square into a courtroom. In midwife Kafui's simple home, time moved differently. It was as if the world outside rushed with urgency, but inside, everything followed the rhythm of healing. The floor was packed earth, the walls lined with floral cloths, and a constant scent of herbs and sweet porridge hung in the air. It was in that small space among clay pots and old lullabibis that Nia began to be reborn. After days suspended between life and death, she could finally sit up on her own. Her body still ached, her breasts still cracked with every feeding, but the twins were gaining color. Their cheeks started to round out, their eyes stayed open longer, and their cries were no longer cries of weakness, but of hunger, of life, of presence. Nia decided to stay. She would not return to her father's house. It didn't matter if he asked for forgiveness, if the village forgave him, if her mother wept for her return. That house to her was closed, because sometimes, in order to live, you must die to certain places. And the house where you were tied to a tree with your newborns could no longer be called home. Donna Kafui understood without needing words. She gave Nia a small room, a new mat, and a corner in the yard to hang her cloths. Nia began tosu. She took scraps of old fabric, pieces of dresses donated by neighbors, and started making cloths for her babies. She embroidered flowers. She embroidered stars. And one day, she stitched her own name into the corner of a blanket. Nia, as if to tell the world and herself that she was still here. Eli came by from time to time. He brought fruit, brought firewood, fixed a roof tile, repaired a bench, but he never intruded. He made no promises. He simply was. When the twins cried louder, he was the one to gently rock the makeshift hammock tied to a tree branch. When Nia needed flour or salt, he was the one who left it on the doorstep before sunrise. And when the boys smiled for the first time, it was at him. But Nia didn't confuse gratitude with rushed love. She knew a wounded heart needs time, that the soul's wounds are like the body's. If you mess with them too soon, they get infected. So she simply said, "They will grow up without inheriting hate." And that was enough. The village little by little adjusted to the new reality. Some women came to Kafui's house with blankets, toys, even goat's milk. Those who once judged her now stayed quiet, and those who always knew but kept silent began to notice, to act. Naye wasn't looking for a stage. She gave no speeches, but her quiet, steady presence was a lesson. In her eyes there was weariness, yes, but also a kind of peace known only by those who faced the worst, and still chosen to stay. One day, sitting in the backyard, she looked at her son sleeping side by side and whispered, "You'll grow up. You'll hear stories about where you were born, but you don't need to carry the weight of it. Your lives begin where the silence ends." And there, in that small yard, a woman with no possessions, no husband, no title, raised what was most precious: dignity. Not the kind of dignity that is paraded, but the kind that's built from the ground up. The kind rooted in quiet choices. The kind that teaches without words that surviving is only the beginning, and that living with courage, that is the miracle. There was a quiet humility in Eli's footsteps. He wasn't the kind of man who sought applause, nor did he carry himself as anyone's savior, and precisely because of that, his presence weighed more than many speeches. He still passed by Dona Kafui's house regularly, but never lingered too long, never intruded on the space Nia needed to rebuild herself. He was like a gentle evening rain, arrived softly, watered just enough, and left before turning into a flood. The whispers began in the village. "Is he going to marry her?" they asked, stifled laughter in their tone. "What's he waiting for?" "He's already raising those boys." But Eli wasn't fazed. He knew many confused gratitude with debt, and that a woman who'd been helped was often seen as someone's property by those who didn't understand the meaning of respect. One afternoon, as Nia hung clothes on the makeshift line, and the twins slept, lulled by the warmth of the day, Eli appeared carrying a sack of freshly harvested cassava. He didn't say much, just leaned the sack by the door, and stood looking up at the tree canopy. Nia, with a soft smile, thanked him as always. And that's when he said something she'd never heard from him. Not even on the day he saved her from the forest. "I didn't save you because I wanted to marry you. I saved you because I was thrown away too. And I came back." Nia stopped. Her hand still held the damp cloth. The wind rustled gently through the cashew tree leaves. And in that moment, it wasn't just a sentence. It was the unveiling of a wound. Eli's story also had scars. His mother, many years ago, had been cast out of her home after a pregnancy out of wedlock. She died not long after giving birth. He was raised by his grandmother and carried in his chest a kind of silent vow. Never let another woman die for the sake of a fabricated idea of honor. "When I heard the crying in the woods," he continued, "I remembered what my grandma used to say. Sometimes God lets us hear what no one else can. And I heard it. It was for me." Nia didn't reply with words, but her eyes tired. Steady gleamed with the recognition of someone who knew they were standing in front of a whole person. Not a perfect one, but a real one. Eli never asked for anything, never demanded love or gratitude. He simply showed up when he could help and stepped back when silence was needed. When the boys began to crawl, he was the one who made their first rubber sandals. When they started to walk, he was the one who held out his arms to catch their falls. And when they laughed for the first time with sound, it was to his voice they responded, but he never forced closeness. When asked if he was the father, he'd say, "I'm whatever they want me to be." And that was enough. Over time, Nia began to speak more, not about the past, but about the present. She shared little stories, divided tasks, asked for advice about the garden, and Eli listened with that kind of listening that holds, that doesn't judge, that understands. Trust is built in silence, like you build a house of clay slowly, carefully, and without rushing. There was one night after a heavy storm when Nia called him to sit on Dorna Kafui's porch. The boys were asleep. The oil lamps flickered softly and, she said, "They smiled at you first. I think their hearts recognized what home feels like." Eli, eyes full, simply nodded. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a declaration. It was recognition. The kind of truth spoken by someone who suffered too much to play with feelings. In that village, where so many had hidden behind tradition to justify cruelty, what Eli did was simple. Acted like a human. He saved. He cared. He stayed. Not because he wanted our ward, but because he knew that those who suffer deeply understand the urgency of not letting anyone be left totally in the dark. And maybe that's the deepest kind of love. The kind that doesn't demand, doesn't invade, doesn't need a title. It just is steady, present, just Wayne never left the village. He kept living in the same wooden house. Surrounded by a wire fence and a gate, he locked himself each night, as if rust and padlocks could keep out the ghosts that already lived inside. The difference now was that noon came looking for him anymore. The yard, once filled with field workers, market friends, and the quiet wisdom of elders, had become a patch of dry, forgotten land. The chickens no longer scratched there. The boys stopped playing ball nearby. Even the wind seemed to pass faster, as if it didn't want to linger at the house of a man who once tried to bury his own daughter. It wasn't a declared punishment. It was the kind of sentence born from the eyes, the kind that comes when smiles disappear, invitations stop, and names become shadows in passing conversations. What Wami lost wasn't just position or status. He lost presence. He lost name. He lost the kind of respect that isn't demanded by force, but earned through dignity. Benny, his wife, stayed for a while longer, did only the bare minimum. But one day, she left without a word, took only a bag of clothes and 2 dish towels, said she was going to visit a distant sister and never came back. She went to live with a cousin in another village where she washed clothes, helped with births, and from time to time caught glimpses of her grandchildren through the windows of Dorna Kafui's house. She never asked to return, never sought explanations. She only wanted peace. Wame remained in the solitude he once used as armor, now became his companion. He harvested cassava, swept the yard, but no longer heard the sound of his own footsteps. Even the old radio, once a source of gospel songs and market ads, no longer worked. The battery died, and there was no one left to fetch another. The days blurred into one. Time slowed. The arms that once cut through soil and ruled with weight now trembled just to carry a basin of water. The man who once tied his daughter to a tree, in the name of honor, now leaned on the wall just to reach the gate. But he never asked for forgiveness. Maybe he didn't know how. Or maybe deep down he still clung to the same hardened pride that kept him from loving his daughter when she needed him most. He saw the boys grow up from afar. He knew they were walking, talking, going to the market with Nia. Sometimes he heard their laughter echo through the dusty streets. He knew one of them had started to ask why he didn't have a grandfather. And when he heard the name Eli in the village, smiles in the women's thanks, in the men's quiet praise, something in him tightened. It wasn't envy. It was absence. It was everything that could have been and never was. In his final years, became nearly invisible. He moved through alleyways, like a shadow. Those who once gave way to him now simply kept walking. Those who once feared his voice now listened in silence. And he finally understood too late that respect isn't forged in harsh words. It's nurtured, it's watered, and it withers when you choose fear as your language. He died on a dry, windy afternoon. A neighbor found him near the well, collapsed with the bucket still in his hand. No note, no confession, only silence. A different silence than the one he had always used. This one was hollow and final. The funeral was small, 6 people, no tears, no candle lit in compassion, just a quickly dug hole in hard earth thrown over it in haste. Because it's not only the body that dies, it's also the story a man chose to write. In the end, Kami reaped exactly what he had planted in that forest. Only this time, the one who watered it was time. And time, when it comes to return what was done, doesn't forget a single branch. The father lost the village's respect and spent his final years alone, reaping what he had sown in the forest. His name, once feared, became a synonym for sorrow. The gate that once opened to visitors and counsel stayed locked from the inside. The land he used to cultivate, once rich with fruit, began to yield little, not because the soil had changed, but because the farmer's soul had dried up. He grew old, surrounded by silence. No photos of his grandchildren, no embrace from his wife, no gaze from his daughter. He watched the village carry on without him, like a river flowing around a stone that refuses to move. And when he passed, it was like a dry leaf carried by the wind. No mourning, no memory, no return. The daughter raised her sons with dignity, strength, and silence. She never taught them hate, only courage. Nia turned each day into a choice to choose goodness even after having known the worst. She sweat little cloths and lessons, cooked with love, and taught with her gaze. She never spoke ill of her father, never demanded explanations. She simply showed through action that it's possible to start over with very little as long as peace is part of it. The twins grew up seeing her not just as a mother, but as a safe harbor. And it was in that harbor that they learned the true meaning of honor, the kind built with kindness, not violence. The young man remained present, not as a savior, but as a steady, just support. Eli never imposed himself, never tried to be a hero. He was simply there, like the root that stays hidden, but holds up the tree. When Nia needed something, it was already done. When the boys reached out, he was already there. And when the village finally understood what it means to be a man, they looked to Eli with the kind of respect reserved for those who never needed to shout to be heard. Eli was the kind of presence that never demanded a place, but that time itself confirms as essential. The village learned that tradition without compassion is just tyranny in disguise. Those who once justified cruelty in the name of honor now told the story with a different tone, not as a fable, but as a warning. Women began to care for one another with greater fierceness. Men began to listen more, and the elders, when gathering, the young beneath the old tree, retold the story like one might say, "Here we almost lost 3 lives because of silence." And since then, silence has been listened to with more care. And in the end, the children who were once born into rejection became symbols of life that refuses to be silenced or left to die in the dark. They walked through the village as a living answer to the abandonment once forced upon them, smiling, curious, full of questions, but never carrying the weight of the shame others tried to pin to their backs. The village watched them grow, and in every step they took recognized the miracle of having survived cruelty. Because when life insists, not even the forest can choke it. They weren't saved by luck alone. They were saved by courage, and they became from that day on a living reminder that light, even when little ways, finds a way.